The moon landings. If we didn't go to the moon, how did the astronauts see aliens on the moon? A special Encounters USA Deceptions of the Ages News report coming up next on Deceptions of the Ages News. Welcome back to the show. I really want to thank you guys for subscribing to the podcast. We're really going through the roof as far as subscribers are going. And if you want to do so and you haven't done that yet, please hit the subscribe button and ring that bell. Tomorrow we're going to have Dr. Simeon Hine on, shares almost my last name, so that's going to be pretty exciting. We're going to be talking about crop circles, reality, and UFOs, along with remote viewing. So it's going to be really an exciting time, an exciting podcast, so you don't want to miss that. All right, so today's subject is basically, if we didn't go to the moon, how did the astronauts see aliens on the moon? Now, have you thought about that for a few minutes? Because that's what we're going to talk about today. And it's kind of I don't know, it might even cause you a little bit of mental or physical distress, because it's really a crazy question to think that, there are a lot of claims associated with UFOs and the moon landings. So since we do aliens, Bigfoot, and UFOs, of course, this is going to be of some interest to us, not only in this podcast, which we're going to be talk a little, we just have limited time to talk about some of this information, but this is going to be a topic that we're going to be talking about for a few podcasts as far as aliens and UFOs go. We're going to be talking about for some time to come. All right, so the first thing is the moon landings. So there's people who say the moon landings happened, and the people that say that the moon landings didn't happen. And some of those people who say that the moon landings did happen are people like astronaut Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong to some extent. And then of course, all the other astronauts, Michael, whatever his name is. Excuse me, I've got to drink water here. All right, so now we have to look at if the fact that there's a lot of people out there that say, no, you didn't go to the moon. They didn't go to the moon. They say it wasn't possible to go to the moon. And as we will see in a little bit, they give a real lot of reasons why we didn't go to the moon, but not to worry, because we're also going to go through all the reasons that people suggest, at least thanks to Google, that say that, all this moon landing hoax business is just, nonsense. It's rubbish, as I'd say in jolly old England. So that's what we're looking at here. The moon landing was hoaxed, and if not, what are the implications for the UFO community and all these claims that have been made about that? All right, so the first thing that we want to talk about is if this is true. Okay, now if this is true that the NASA and people in the government, that they faked these landings, well, the first thing that is true is that people are lying to us. The astronauts lied to us. There are people in the government that lied to us. There are people in the media and we don't know to what extent these people were involved, but we are going to look at that. But more than that, it also means that all of these lies, there is only one group that's going to know what's really going on here. And that is going to be our friends in the intelligence agencies, like the Central Intelligence Agency and the NSA, though probably not the NSA, but definitely in the Central Intelligence Agency. So if these people know that the moon landing, and we haven't even looked at the evidence, I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying that these are the implications. If the Central Intelligence Agency had a hand in the fake moon landing, then, and also leaking a UFO story from the moon, from a fake moon landing, then that's really weird. It's really, really weird, but it also has some serious implications, and that is, at least as far as the military goes, and a lot of people that you see as so-called experts in the UFO community, these so-called researchers who have access to this classified information, well, it really brings them into a lot of, as you know, it makes them, I guess we'll say, suspect. So that is some of the implications. So before we go any farther, if you have any comments or whatever, please put them in the description below. And I'd sure like to hear what you say. And I'm sure as we go along, you're going to have one or two comments at least. Okay. So now let's look at this rationally. There are two things that are possible. We either went to the moon or we didn't go to the moon. That's it. Those are two things that are possible. But because these claims are being made that Buzz Aldrin and then Neil Armstrong and Michael Collins would have been out orbiting, so he wouldn't have seen, but that they saw these UFOs sitting on the rim of the crater. Okay, so that makes it a third option almost. So the first option that we have to look at is it's all true. Everything's true. These guys went to the moon. They saw UFOs on the moon, and you can believe it 100%. All right. So that brings up questions of, well, is the government then admitting that there's aliens and UFOs? But we're not going to talk about that right now. So that's the happy world that we all want to live in. I want to live in. They landed on the moon, and they were able to do that with this technology, and they saw aliens there, yada, yada. All right. So then the next possibility is it's still happy time, but it's a little less comforting. And that is that we did go to the moon, but this alien story thing, this is something that, it was cooked up by the astronauts, or it got into the story somehow, but it's basically just based on not good judgment and meaning that they saw some moon dust or something that they mistook for a huge spaceship. So all I'm saying there, that in the first possibility, everything's on the up and up. Suddenly we have aliens. Second possibility, everything's on the up and up, no aliens. Astronauts maybe got a little loopy, maybe they got a little space crazy, who knows. Then there is option number 3. Now, option number 3, I'm afraid, is not as happy and fuzzy and comforting as the first two. In option number 3, we never went to the moon. Okay? The entire affair, including the stories of aliens, and also remember that these guys, I mean, there were ham radio operators that have said they picked up these signals from that they picked up signals coming from the astronauts on the Earth, talking about Santa Claus, which was their code word for aliens or whatever. So anyway, so these guys picked these things up, but they were basically disinformation communications. And why? Why were they disinformation communications? I don't know. But you can talk about that. Leave it in the comments. We just have a lot to cover today, and we just don't have time for that. So again, we have three possibilities. Number one, we went to the moon, and America is great, and everybody is on the up and up, and it's just super. And then we have option number two. We went to the moon. America's great. Astronauts maybe got a little, maybe they took some of the sauce with them. Who knows? Maybe they were seeing ghosts like that USC quarterback last year. Anyway, that was those are the three possibilities we have. Now, we do want the first one to be true. And the reason that we want the first one to be true and not the last one is that we're going to find out in just a few minutes that even though as much as we want the first one to be true, we're going to find a lot of evidence that maybe it's not the way that we think it is. And I'm not saying we didn't go to the moon. I'm not going to say that at all. I'm going to show you the evidence, and you can decide what you want. And leave a comment in the description, but don't forget to hit that subscribe button while you're doing it. All right, so I just want to say this again, that we're not trying to say whether or not we went to the moon. We just want to look at the facts, and especially based on the fact that 50 years later was last summer. So we didn't do a podcast about it, which we should have, but I think I was at ECETI Ranch at the time. So it's been 50 years since the moon landings. So we're going to see, with all these people who are saying it's a hoax, we're going to look and do a search on Google, and we're going to find out exactly what Google is saying. So we're going to look at Google by, first of all, we're going to put in a search, and we're going to put in moon hoax, or you can put in moon landing hoax. You get the same thing. Now, as you can see, as we scroll down here, it really looks like the moon landing or the fake moon landing theory has been debunked. Yes, I mean, look at all of these articles, whatever, that say, oh yeah, it's been debunked. And yeah, you've got some credible ones out there, I'm sure. And now, so let's double our search and go over to look at YouTube. So as we see on YouTube, just like in the Google search, you have basically, it's like the mainstream media, right? And I'm just going to say this now. I looked for my conspiracy videos. I typed in the titles. I typed in everything I could. I could not find them. It was very, very hard. But if you want to get the mainstream view of things, you type in moon landing hoax, and then you'll see all that it's all been debunked. And the one that I thought was the most incredible was this one. It's by NVIDIA, and they do, I guess, computer graphics, whatever. Oh, like they do your computer board, I guess. So NVIDIA has debunked the moon landing hoax theory because they have a computer graphics software that shows 3D the landing site of Apollo 11. So right there, and they show how it's possible that you would have had light, even though the sun is on the other side of the landing craft, you would have had enough light to get this perfect picture that Neil Armstrong took of Buzz Aldrin. So thanks a lot, NVIDIA, for solving that hoax for us. And yes, I guess based on all of these things that we see here on the internet, we see on Google or on YouTube, and thanks to NVIDIA with their CGI, I don't see who would need more evidence that three guys with the technology and the computing power of not even my smartphone or your smartphone, how three guys can go 375,000 miles through absolute zero temperatures, land on the moon after separating from, they were three guys in a spaceship, and then two of the guys got in the lander and went down and landed on the moon, picked up rocks. Few missions later, they'd be down there playing golf and driving a car around. But on this mission, this all happened according to NASA, and so that's the story. And according to all this stuff on YouTube, the stuff that happened back then 50 years ago without really that much technology, and in a tin can, these guys were able to travel to the moon and orbit 25 miles overhead, and rendezvous after landing on the moon, collecting rocks, rendezvous at 250 miles and 1,000 miles an hour, and then head back to the Earth. All right, so with all of this stuff that we've seen on the internet, seen on YouTube, it looks like the internet or the moon landing hoax is just that. It really looks like, all the, mainstream people like CBS and who are those, the gadget guys, the mystery, the Mythbusters. They debunked the debunking, or they debunked the debunking, I guess it is. And other people like NVIDIA have unhoaxed the hoaxers, or hoaxed the hoaxers, or I'm not sure where that even goes. So anyway, so we have a lot of evidence now to show you so that I can sleep at night knowing that everything that the astronauts, Buzz Aldrin actually punched a guy for saying that he didn't go to the moon. How much more conviction do you need than that? So, just a couple of things, though. Again, we believe that this is how it is. Now, there might be other options that people would look at, like maybe they did go to the moon, but they couldn't photograph the stuff, which you're going to see pretty soon. The stuff wouldn't work, so they had to photograph it on the Earth, even though these guys did go to the moon. So is that a total possibility? Sure is, and I'm not looking at it. In this one, or they either went or they didn't go. If you want to talk about them going, just look at and not just having the ability to photograph it, then look at the evidence, but look at the complete evidence, because that's a very interesting theory, and it's also one that I would like to believe. But as we will see, it's not really plausible. So let's go ahead and let's look at. We've looked at the evidence for the moon landing, and now we're going to look at the evidence against the moon landing. So, as I said before, the first thing I want to do is tell you that I had a really hard time I watched this stuff a lot. I know it inside and out, and because I really am interested in this and that question of how did they see UFOs if they didn't go to the moon. So I'm always looking for stuff. I'm always looking for somebody to slip up. And I'll tell you right now, these guys, even though they are British, most of them, these guys in this documentary, it's called What Happened on the Moon. And it's got people like Marcus Allen of the Nexus organization, Nexus magazine. They're from the UK and pretty smart people. When you look at that, they present a number of arguments that they could not have possibly gone to the moon. So we're going to look at that. We're also going to look at another documentary that is even a little bit more challenging to the current theories, and that is an interview of Henry Kissinger and Alexander Haig, who was Secretary of State for Nixon. Kissinger was Al Haig was his chief of staff. Lawrence Eagleburger was there, and he was on the national security. He was national security advisor. So we have the Russian ambassador. Also, all of them tanked. All of them tanked and totally talking freely about what happened in the during what happened for the Apollo 11 mission and further on. And then after that, we're going to go to what is also on the internet, this confession by Stanley Kubrick that basically details and supports everything that these guys, Rumsfeld, did I say Rumsfeld before? Rumsfeld's part of that. And basically supports everything that these guys say as far as who approached him, what was the reward for it. Their stories are basically concurrent. And these are not people that the documentary that was done by the French was done, I believe, after Kubrick's death. Now, let's not get into any more right now. Let's just go into this is on the documentary What Happened on the Moon. It's got Marcus Allen and a few other people, leaving the link in the leaving the link in the description, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So the first thing, now they just go through this documentary or show or whatever it is. They just go through and put up all their objections to why these astronauts could not have possibly survived a trip to the moon, taken pictures, et cetera, et cetera. The first one is the Van Allen belts. Well, the first one actually is not even on my list. The first one is Werner von Braun saying you would need a huge, like a 4 or 5 stage rocket to get somebody to have the boosting power to get them all the way to the moon. And the one that they have for the Saturn V, that is like about 1/3 of the size of what von Braun was proposing and what you would need to get somebody all the way to the moon. Okay, so even before we get off the Earth, the rocket probably is not big enough. Second, the Van Allen, and this is according to Werner von Braun, not me. I'm not a rocket scientist by any means. Now, the first one on my list is the Van Allen belts. Van Allen belts are radiation belts that surround the Earth. And the argument is that if these guys had been, they had no shielding, and these guys actually contacted the suit maker, the guys that made the suits, the spacesuits, and asked them if there was shielding in the suit included in the design, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, contact NASA. And of course, NASA's not going to tell you anything about the design. But we do know that the spaceship, I mean, to shield somebody from radiation, you basically need a lead shield. And the weight of a lead-lined capsule. There's no way it would have taken off the ground, and maybe that's why Werner von Braun said you needed such a big capsule, because he wanted to include lead shielding in the design. But okay, I'm not saying it's a hoax, but let's just say that the Van Allen belts, the experts believe they would have killed anybody who traveled through them. Forget about coming back. They would have been so sick after having traveled through them that, et cetera, et cetera. And the argument against that is that the astronauts lived a long and happy life. Well, if they didn't go through them, then they might have. Or if they went through them, then they got lucky. Okay, the next thing is the film and the cameras. Now, the film is very, I don't want to say expensive, but it's 70 millimeter film, and it's top of the line for the day. And the cameras are called Hasselblad cameras. And according to this documentary, the camera is mounted on the chest, and you don't have a viewfinder. All you can do is point and shoot your picture. Now, the first thing that's wrong with this is that at those temperatures on the moon, and there's nothing heating up this camera, or there's nothing cooling it or heating it, that film is either going to be frozen or it's going to melt. And not only that, if it went through the Van Allen belts, it would have been destroyed by radiation, coming back, going, whatever. But it would have been destroyed by the radiation going through the belts, unless it was kept in some lead-lined thing or something. All right. So now the gloves that these guys are wearing, the pictures that they're taking are perfect. They're perfect pictures, and they have no viewfinder. So it's kind of a point and shoot, but those things did not have autofocus. You had to focus that, and you had to adjust the white balance, etc., before you took the picture. So it was not, how did you do that with those gloves on? And those gloves had steel mesh in them. So just imagine, just use your cell phone, put on a couple pairs of gardening gloves, and try to use your cell phone. See how well that works for you. All right. So now there are a number of reasons that they give, and I'm just going to give some of these. Most of them you've heard, and maybe some of them you haven't. But of course, on the landing pods on the lunar lander, there's no dust. They're completely clean. When the lander is getting ready to land, you can hear Neil Armstrong talking perfectly. I don't know if you've ever stood next to a jet or a rocket engine. You can't hear yourself scream. So how could he have a powerful rocket engine sitting right underneath him and still not have the ability, or still have the ability to talk without yelling or even raising his voice? All right. So then we have the wind on the flag, and you've all seen the controversy about that. You have all seen the controversy about the shadows and the whatever, the light, the shadows, et cetera, et cetera. And there are a number of other things that I could go into, but I'm not for the sake of time. Okay, then there's the motion of the astronauts. And if you happen to just speed up the motion a little bit, it looks like the motion is normal. It looks like these people are just walking around or jumping around on the Earth. All right. And then again, there is the issue of the temperature on the moon. It is, I guess, absolute zero or close to it. Out of the sun and in the sun, it's 200 some degrees Celsius. So it's very hot. And so how are those suits? They would have to have a huge air conditioning unit and heating unit in order to keep that suit cool or warm. And then what about those little micro dust things that are going like thousands of miles an hour? Wouldn't that just shoot right through that suit? All right. So that is all the evidence, and that is the evidence presented in the documentary, What Happened on the Moon. And I will put that uh, link in the description. Now, now we're going to get into some stuff. And if you have not seen this, it's a documentary called The Dark Side of the Moon. This is, I mean, if you think that people really went to the moon, you've got to see this. And I'm not saying that people didn't go to the moon, but when you see this and you see Donald Rumsfeld, who was an aide to President Nixon at the time, Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State, Al Haig, Chief of Staff. That's General Al Haig, Chief of Staff. Lawrence Eagleburger, he was on the National Security Council, and he was an advisor. Also, the Russian ambassador. Now, all of these people were somehow grabbed by a French filmmaker, and they were at a party and were willing to talk about the Apollo moon missions. Now, what they say is really, really, I'm not going to even say it. Watch it for yourself. But I am going to tell you what they said. Basically, they did not know that these guys wouldn't die on the moon. And I don't know exactly how far these missions went, but what they say is they didn't know these guys wouldn't die on the moon. Nixon didn't want people dying on the moon. So he said, well, let's just make a movie of them on the moon. And if something happens to them, then they died on the way, whatever. But we got to the moon. We landed on the moon. So that was the deal. And from there, Rumsfeld and Kissinger approached Stanley Kubrick, director Stanley Kubrick, 2001 Space Odyssey. And if you know this story, I'm not going to go too far into it, but I, again, watch this video. It's pretty crazy, but they approached Stanley Kubrick, and he said, and we'll talk about this in a bit, he said, yes, I will do it. And why he did it, we will discuss, when we're talking about this other documentary. But right now, I just want to really focus on this one, because these are the people. I mean, they're sitting here talking and having drinks and talking about what happened. Now, Kubrick agreed to do it. And the reason he agreed to do it was because he was getting ready to film a movie called Barry Lyndon. And in Barry Lyndon, there are scenes that are filmed in these old castles, and they only have candlelight. And a normal camera at the time would have just shown darkness. So he wanted a camera that would pick up these images of these people in candlelight. So he wanted this, what was called a Zeiss lens, and they said, you can have your lens to film Barry Lyndon if you do this project. And also they guaranteed him that if he did the project, then he would have carte blanche in Hollywood. He'd be able to do whatever he wanted. All right. So according to Rumsfeld and who else? Kissinger, this was the deal. So they got these guys, they got actors together, they got guys to work on the production set, etc. And they had just a very small crew, and I guess they filmed it like over a weekend or whatever. And Kubrick, after they filmed it, Kubrick came back and said, it's terrible. They'll never buy it. So they had to film it again. Now, when it's over, when it's all over, the two guys that were the astronauts, I believe, they were CIA agents, and they were sent. They were told, they were paid off and basically told to disappear. But according to Rumsfeld and Kissinger, Nixon wasn't happy with that. He didn't want these two people out there that at some point could come back and bite him in the butt and say that they faked the moon landings. So he sent these people out to kill them. And so and I'm not kidding. This is Kissinger and Rumsfeld talking about Nixon sent these people, and they said they didn't do it, but Nixon sent these guys out to kill these guys, which they did. They killed them so that they would never talk about it. All right, so here you have these high-level Nixon officials talking about faking the moon landing. All right, and I know we've seen stuff from the Mythbusters and NVIDIA and all these other people, these mainstream people. They've all had their say about how this is all these people are so insane. These people are the government officials that were in charge of it. I don't think you can really debunk what these guys are saying, but watch this for yourself. So now the last thing that I want to talk to you about as part of maybe there was a hoax from that camp is another documentary that I watched. I actually listened to it before I watched it. And after I listened to it and I'm watching it, there's a disclaimer that says that this video is fake and it's not Stanley Kubrick and it's been debunked, et cetera, et cetera. And that's one place or one like YouTube channel. I saw it on other ones. I didn't see that same disclaimer, but there are some things on there that whether it's true or not, they can put information in these things that is true, so at least it looks credible. I mean, maybe it's not Stanley Kubrick talking, but he basically says the same thing that Rumsfeld and Kissinger said about the Zeiss lens and about shooting it. And also there was an agreement that if he did it, he could never say a word to anybody, or, the old offer you can't refuse, or he would be killed. Now, he didn't completely keep, according to this documentary, he didn't completely keep his promise. He told Steven Spielberg, and he told director Steven Spielberg, and he also told director Barry Levinson. Now, Barry Levinson he directed Wag the Dog. And in Wag the Dog, a director or a producer is hired to get a president out of trouble. And when the president is out of trouble, the project is over. Excuse me. The producer says, "No, this is my project." And they told him before, "You can't ever take credit for this. Nobody can know about it." Robert De Niro says that. And he says, no. At the end, he says, "This is my project. It's the best one I've ever done. I want people to know." Now, in this supposed confession of Stanley Kubrick, he says the same thing. He says, "This is my project. This is my best project. I pulled a hoax over all these people over the world, and I want them to know." So I want them to know. And so I'm just going to point out that say whatever you want. If it's not true, okay, I'm an idiot and I'm wrong. But in this thing, he says, you can't release this for 15 years. And he makes this interviewer, I guess, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and he'll have to pay $3 million if he does, et cetera, et cetera. So he says you can't do it for 15 years. And in 1999, Steven Kubrick died after doing this interview. And I guess this thing was released in 2015. Again, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. All right. So, what does all of this actually mean? I mean, let's just kind of reiterate what we've talked about so far. I think that we have seen evidence from Donald Rumsfeld, who was, what was he? He was the national security advisor for Bush, but he was also an advisor to Nixon. We've seen Lawrence Eagleburger. We've seen General Al Haig. We've seen who else was in there? Henry Kissinger. All say they faked the moon landing. I don't know what more you need from that. Not only that, they admitted that they killed the two people involved. And this is, anyway, you can't be more real than that. So the implications for this are that if the moon landing was faked, and these astronauts, and one of the things that in the so-called confession of Stanley Kubrick, one of the things that he says is that Neil Armstrong, who looks just totally distraught after coming back from the moon, supposedly, that he begged him to come forward and tell people that he did it. And we also have all of these, on YouTube, they have all these things about The Shining and how he's trying to give out clues in that movie, whatever. I don't have that much time to follow this stuff, but anyway, it's all there. That's Kubrick couldn't live with himself. He couldn't live with that, with what he'd done, with pulling the wool over so many people's eyes, just because he knew how to use a camera. So there we go, back to the implications of all this. So if the whole moon thing was hoaxed and the CIA knew the whole thing was hoaxed, how many other, CIA, who knows who else, but definitely the CIA would have known it was all hoaxed. So how many other things have been hoaxed? Was Roswell a hoax? Was Kenneth Arnold a hoax? Was Maury Island a hoax? Are these all just stories that were cooked up by the CIA? We don't know, but I think that what we do need to do is we need to start questioning a lot of things, because it almost looks like the CIA is creating its own conspiracy theories to cover its own conspiracies, right? You have astronauts planning theories about UFOs on a moon they didn't even go to. What is that? So I don't know if anybody's put these together or not, but it's really weird that they would try to pull over, so much wool over people's eyes. Now, I'm just going to say this, and leave your comments if you like. But okay, so maybe they didn't go, and they wanted to prove to the Russians that they did go. Well, if you watch this documentary that I'm talking about, this Dark Moon, the Russian ambassador says we knew from the beginning it was a hoax. They said we knew the Americans couldn't make it to the moon. They said we knew about the Van Allen belts and a number of other things, but they said we weren't going to even get involved with it, because of course they had their own things going on with their own space program. So what about there's Roswell, there's the Kenneth Arnold, there's Maury Island. What about the Washington merry-go-round in 1952? What about that? That wasn't fake because there were so many eyewitnesses. All right, so I think that one thing that we're going to have to do here is, we've had all of this talk about disclosure. We've had the Disclosure Project. We've had all of these military people come out and give us all kinds of information that doesn't seem to really shock anybody. It doesn't wake any representatives up. And then finally, we have now, we have the, we've had them for a long time. We've had the Nimitz encounters. Now, are these real? Because as I said in my Nimitz encounter video that I just did, I believe that there's enough evidence to show that this Tic Tac video they're talking about is one of ours, and that they're just trying to keep track on not only our technology that's going around, but they're trying to keep track of Russian, China's, and whoever else's exotic technology that might be going out there as they're stealing our secrets from, the Democrats. So that's one of the implications of what's going on here, is that the CIA may have just cooked up the whole UFO thing, but there are real live encounters that people have witnessed. So what we really have to do is scrutinize all these military encounters. And we really have to scrutinize people who claim to have classified information from the military. We have to question, how did they get it? And why are they ordained to be the UFO expert compared to other people? Who chose them, right? And why is it that you have the same people saying the same things at these UFO conferences? And why is it that you have a, it's almost a directed series of topics? Now, there is a program, topics that people pursue in the UFO community. And there is a movie on Netflix about these people that are paid by the government to go out and spread disinformation and control the debate and the conversation about UFOs. And what do I mean? I mean, like I was talking in my last interview with Carrie Cassidy and Ron Moorhead, I'm talking about how you have certain topics that seem to be the hot button topics, like an Arctic civilization alien civilization is flash frozen, and then you have. What else do you have? You have the secret space program with William Tompkins, and you have now you have all through it all, you have the disclosure. And I attended a MUFON meeting just the other day, and they asked, "Do you think there's going to be disclosure?" And these people said, after talking about all of these encounters about the Navy, that saying we're looking for UFOs, they said, well, maybe this year. So even MUFON doesn't seem to really understand it. You've had all the disclosure you're going to get. And the reason they keep saying that there's going to be disclosure is to keep getting people back to these conferences, because once they get disclosure, nobody's going to want to go to any more of these conferences, at least for that, to hear about when are we going to have disclosure. So that is that's another question that I have. If all this stuff is true, are these people directing the topics and the conversation, and just trying to keep people basically like sheep, just wandering willy-nilly and not really able to focus on anything? So these are all of the things that are associated with a alien or a moon hoax. And the final thing that I want to talk about when we're talking about these people that are in the UFO community, et cetera, is I mentioned the William Tompkins and the secret space program. And a lot of people, I'm not going to mention names, but a lot of people are out there getting a lot of attention and probably making a lot of money talking about a secret space program. Now, based on what we've seen, and these guys are saying that, oh, the Nazis are out there and they've got a program and they're in Antarctica and they've been building UFOs since World War II, and there's all these different people, et cetera, right? You've heard it all. So that secret space program, we're going to talk about that at another time. We're going to talk about Nazis and UFOs. And we had to do this podcast first because this is kind of a background on what's going on there. Because who was involved in our program was Wernher von Braun. So we need to talk about Germans and UFOs. But after all of this is the fact that there is the secret of the secret space program. Based on all this is that there is no program. There is no secret space program, et cetera, et cetera. And all of the stuff that people are talking about, off-planet officers, et cetera, where's the evidence? Because it looks like we couldn't even get to the moon, and people bought the CIA line that they were seeing aliens on the moon. So leave your comments. Let me know what you think. But I think that might be the real secret behind the secret space program. There ain't no secret space program. All right. So you guys, that's our podcast for today. We've got Simeon Hein is going to be on tomorrow. We are going to be going more into this Nazi UFO topic, and we'll probably be doing that next week. We're going to be doing another podcast on our joint project with the UFO I-Team, the American Primate Conservancy, and of course the North American Dogman Project. So we're going to be doing that towards the end of this month. And next week I have Kevin Moore, a jolly good bloke from the UK. The Kevin Moore Show is a great show, and we're going to have him on to talk about some of these topics as well. So I guess that just leaves one thing left to say, and that is, holy cow, what an amazing report. Did you ever think that the government would associate one lie with another lie? Well, you've seen the evidence. It's up for you to decide. Leave your comments in the description, and don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. All right then, this is Deceptions of the Ages News and Encounters USA, and we'll see you next time.